guys, it's a technical video today, no fishing. Unfortunately the rivers are still flooded and it looks set to continue for at least another week before we can get out. So I'm going to do some reel maintenance today. I've got a lot of reels that they all need new line, some need reversing, what have you. And this is a method that I've been using for 35 years and it was passed on to me by my dad. This is what he always did. Back in the old days before we had cordless drills, we wound by hand to take reels off and reverse. And this trick is using toilet roll, the cardboard tube out of the toilet roll as a cartridge. Back in the day, I used Abu 501, 506 reels quite a lot. And the trick was to only load about 50 yards of line onto those reels because we got a lot of problems with line bedding in. So we only loaded half a spool, and after a dozen sessions fishing, we would reverse the line. So we got a fresh portion that we're fishing again, and then strip off and bin after a few more sessions, and then put the other 50-yard line on, fish again, and then you could reverse it again. So a 100-yard spool of 3-pound test Maxima or Bayo, what was using in the day, you would actually load your reel about 4 times and it would do you a season, no problem. And the trick was, we used beer cans, we used a rolled up newspaper, and eventually my dad had the idea. He started using toilet roll cartridges, and it was wound on by hand because we didn't have the battery operated drills back in those days. It would wind on by hand and reverse to another tube, and then it will put that tube in the actual toilet roll holder in our bathroom and wind it back to the reel that way. I've continued that, just brought it up to date a little bit. I've been using this method for years and I've never had problems, and I can't understand why people have problems loading line. It's a very simple process, but I'm going to go through it with you step by step. First I'm going to show you how I reverse a spool of line. I've got 100 yards of 40 kilo braid. This is my main jerkbait reel, and I'm going to reverse this line. I'm going to show you that. I'm going to show you how to load 100 meters of line onto a spool that holds probably 300 meters. So how is that going to work? You need to back the line. You need some backing line. I'm going to show you how to do that perfectly. Also going to show you how I work with big bulk spools. That is 300 yard spools, 500 yards, 1,000 yard spools. The bulk spools. How do you work with big bulk spools to measure off a set portion of line and load that to your reel with backing and have it perfectly 2 millimeters from the lip? That is the aim that we're going for. Any carp fishermen, hang on till the end of the video. I've also got something for you carp guys out there. It's uprated a little bit because I'll get my big pit reels out, and there's 350 yards of line loaded on each of those. I'll show you how to clean, reverse, load those. So hang on a little bit for that if you're interested. I'll show you how I make the arbor. Very, very simple. It's just made me remember back in the day as well, we didn't have money for spare spools. I mean, I've got reels now. I've got reel, it's got 4 spools to it, one of my reels. But back in the day, you didn't get a spare spool quite often when you bought a new reel, and spare spools were expensive. We didn't have that kind of money. We didn't have money to lay out for 5 or 6 different lines either. So what we would use the toilet rolls as a storage system as well. If I was fishing with 4-pound line, just for example, and I wanted to put a 6-pound line on, I certainly didn't strip the 4 off and throw it in the bin. We'd wind it by hand, and that would perfectly act as like a cartridge, if you will, and it hold that line on there. You could write the details of the line, what it was, and then put your other line on. And we wanted to go back to that. It was quite a simple process. We kind of used toilet rolls as spare spools, if you like, and just a storage system. But enough talk, let's get on with it. So like I said, this is my Akuma Komodo. It's got 100 meters of 40 kilo Power Pro braid. That's 88-pound braid, and I'm going to reverse it. I've only just put this on, it doesn't need reversing, but I'm going to show you for the purposes of this video how I do it. That is to take this line off, swap it around so that the line that's right at the end of this spool now becomes the line at the top. Why would you want to do that? Well, braid, this olive green Power Pro, once you've used it for a number of sessions, the friction of it constantly travelling through the line guides and reeling back through the line, and it takes the coating off and it gets a little bit fluffy, the braid does. It doesn't affect the strength of it, but I've noticed it's not as stiff. It becomes really, really soft, and it's quite easy to get wind knots on. It also loses its colour. It goes from this olive green and it fades out to a really washed out green, grey, sometimes even white, depending on how old it is. So it's preferable to just reverse it. As the video goes on and we do more and more line loading, I will fast forward a lot of the parts on the video. You don't need to see me sit winding line onto a reel. You've seen all that before, but just for this first one, I'll show you how I will reverse this line. So firstly, let's get the arbor. I'll show you how to make the arbor shortly. And we'll put a toilet roll cartridge onto the arbor. The end in. And let's just whiz up the wing nut. Just load it into my drill. Now, I will say that if you are going to replicate this method, then be careful with the drill. The usual disclaimer. So I've got the toilet roll cartridge on there. I like to keep the braid in the middle. So I'll make 2 lines there. I'm going to try and keep the braid within those 2 lines there. You'll see why shortly. But let's just keep it within that. It's about the same actually as the width of the spool, so it's not going to be a problem. Hope you can see that. So what we'll do first, get a little bit of tape, and I'll just tape the end of the braid onto the toilet roller like that. Get a little bit more tape, and I'll just put this over the pad of my thumb. And I'm not doing this against the clutch, I'm not doing it against the clicker, I'm just going to do it in free spool mode, but my thumb is just going to control the speed so I don't get any overruns. So I'm going to start off nice and slowly. And here we go. Start slowly until you get the confidence. You need four eyes for this. You need 2 pairs of eyes. One to watch the line that's being loaded onto the toilet roll, and another one to watch the spool. Obviously, when I'm getting towards the end of the spool, I need to slow the drill down. See, the level one's doing a great job there of just easing the line over. Still a little bit more to go yet. Nearly there. And we're there. Now this is it's about 5 meters of nylon line, monofilament, and as you know, using braid on a bait caster, you need a little bit of nylon backing just so it grips the spool. Otherwise, you'll get problems with the braid slipping around. So there it is. There's the knot. There's where the braid's joined. This is just a little bit of monofilament there. So just going to snip that off there. We'll snip the knot off. We'll save that until we reverse the line. So my 100 yards of line is now on the toilet roll arbor. We've got to now reverse it. This is where the reversing happens. So this loose end of the braid was once sitting at the very back of the spool. And we're going to reverse it round so this loose end becomes the bit which is right at the end of the spool where I'm going to attach my my wire trace and jerkbait to. So carefully take that off and put on a fresh toilet roll cartridge into that, wing nut on, and just pop it back into the drill. Again, I'll make those two lines try and keep the line just in that portion there. A little bit of tape. I'll just tape that on there. Now, I like to have the toilet roll of braid. I just loosely hold it in my hand, and the braid is coming off the bottom of the spool, not the top, but the bottom, and it's running between my fingers there. And this is where the reversing happens. So we're going to swap all of that, the full toilet roll, onto this now empty toilet roll. So we'll start off slowly. And speed up when you get more confident. Coming to the end, and there it goes. So that's now empty. And this is our 100 meters of Power Pro braid. It is now being reversed. You can actually see the little colour difference. I hope you can see that on the camera, but the bit that's now is going to go onto the start of the spool is a lighter colour than that at the back of the spool. And that, it's been used a few times, and like I said, that olive green coating, it does come off a little bit. So now we have to put this back on to our bait caster. And how are we going to do that? Well, back in the day, me and my dad, we used to get each other, we had a little piece of broomstick and hold it through there, and we just used to hold it and just reel it off. If we was on our own, you know, let's say we used to go in the bathroom and just put that onto the toilet roll holder and reel it in from that. But what I do now, just bear with me, I should have brought it in with me. I'll just get it. Oh, apologies, I've just been out and pinched this from the kitchen. This is the kitchen roll stand. It's the thing that you put the kitchen roll on in the kitchen. It's nice and heavy. And all we'll do with that is put the toilet roll on. So you know what's going to happen there. And there we go. So I'm just going to wind all of this 100 meters back onto the spool, and once it's done, that line will be reversed. When I'm jerkbait fishing, the maximum range, well, the average range I would say will be 25, 30 meters, yards even. It's very rarely I cast jerkbaits further than that. Occasionally we'll chuck some big ones. Get some big casts, maybe 40 yards, other side of the river, 50 yards even. But that really is the maximum range, is what I want, is 50 yards. That's all I need. So if I put 100 yards on, I can reverse it, and it will give me 50 yards of brand new braid to be able to use once this starts to get a bit warm. So that's it. It is as simple as that to reverse the line. There's that braid. It's simply just been reversed. So I'm going to put brand new braid onto my Shimano bait runner. This is a small bait runner that I use this for float fishing. Use it for dead baits, live baits, drifter float fishing. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to completely strip all of this braid and the backing line behind it. I'm going to strip it all off so that you can see the procedure in full. I'm going to start with a bare spool. So just a bit of tape onto the toilet roll and use the drill to completely strip it. We'll put it aside because we're going to use it in a little bit. I'm going to use some of that old line for backing. So there we are, completely stripped that. Now here's my line loading tool, £9 from Amazon. It does the same thing as holding a spool on a pencil, which is my preferred method. You can stick to your own method here, bucket, water, whatever works for you, but this works for me. So I'm going to put my spool of Power Pro braid and I'm going to completely reel it all on to that empty spool. Now because we're doing this backwards, you can see the line level is significantly short of the lip of the spool there. That's going to inhibit your casting. We need to bring the line up to the level of the spool, to the level of the lip of the spool. I tend to go for 2mm just below. So we're going to get that old line and tie it on to the end of that tag end of that brand new braid, and I'm going to continue reeling on top of the braid all of that old line until we've got the level right on the spool. And there's the level about right. It's about 2mm just below the lip of the spool. That's how I like them. So once we've got the level right, we're going to take the spool off again, blue tack it to the table like we did before, and we're going to completely reverse the line now. So we've got to completely empty it all onto one toilet roll and then swap it over and completely run it off onto another toilet roll. How we did with the bait caster, this is where the reversing happens. So roll off the spool there, just take the tag end so it don't unravel when I take this off. So I'm going to take this off, put an empty toilet roll on and then run it to that empty one. And that will reverse the line. We know that the volume on the spool is correct because we did that first. The volume doesn't matter if it's on forwards or backwards. Once you've got the volume right, it'll always be the same. So line coming off the bottom of the toilet roll in my left hand and wind it from one all the way over to the other. So that's it, it's been reversed now. So that's going to go onto our kitchen stand. And we'll put that spool back on the reel and we'll completely reel it all the way back on. The backing line will be going on first, and then because it's tied to the braid will come through and you'll see the level. There we are. So exactly the same as when we did it backwards, but obviously the volume will always remain the same. Now this is the spare spool for that reel. I like fine line on this, and rather than taking a load of extra equipment out with me, if I need to catch some live baits, I'll just pop this spool onto the reel, and I'll use my 10-foot pike float fishing rod to do that. Saves taking extra equipment out. So same procedure again, completely empty the spool of all of the old line. I'm going to take it all the way back down to a bare spool. Again, here's my brand new line. I'm going to reel all of this in. This is 100 meters of 6-pound line. I think it came free from a magazine. It's just cheap line. It's fine for what I want to do. So reel it all on, and then it's going to be short of the spool like the braid was. So we'll use some of that old line, tie it to a new line, and continue reeling until you get the level on the spool correct. Once we've got the level correct, we can then reverse the line. Same procedure, blue tack down to the table, take it all off onto one toilet roll, swap toilet rolls and run it all the way back over onto a fresh one. This is reversing the line. back on the kitchen stand and load it all the way back onto that empty spool. And once we've done that, because we got the level right, even though we did it backwards, now we've reversed it, that level is going to remain the same. So I've got £6 braid on one, £6 line on one, and I've got my 13 kilo braid on the other. They're both filled up to the correct level. These are ready to fish now. And you see there's my £6 mono filled up to the edge of the spool. And here's the braid, 13 kilo braid. And again, that's lovely level, just ready to fish. So, big reels and bulk spools, how do we work with them? Well, this is one of my carp fishing reels. I've got 3 of these and they've all got spare spools, so that's 6 spools. This particular one has got 350 yards of Gardner GT 80, I think it's called, plus a load of backing on there. And then I've got spare spools for all 3, and between those there's 1,000 metres of 20-pound subline that's divided across the 3. These are pike fishing reels. We need to put new braid on these. Look how washed out the braid is on those. That's been reversed. That's about 4 years old on them. But that needs renewing. And this is a 300 yard spool of 20 kilo Power Pro braid. So that 300 yards, it needs to be divided into 2 equal lengths to go onto these reels with the backing. I work with bulk spools, the same as I do with the smaller spools, apart from the measuring the set up portion off, obviously. But I don't use the toilet rolls. You can imagine 350 metres of 20-pound line on that toilet roll. It's going to bury it. Also, mono, it has a constricting effect as well, and the more and more that you put on there, it's going to crush it, and you're not going to get it on and off the arbor. It's going to be really hard work. So what we've done, we've just up-rated the system a little bit. All these are rod tubes. It's just an old rod tube. I just measured it off to a length that I thought would be okay, and it's been working fine since I did that. How big is it? It is 17.5 centimetres or 7 inches. That's how they are. There's 2 of those. I've got a matching arbor for these. Don't need a central support because these are much stiffer. And these, the end caps, these just work as bushings. So when I put them onto my kitchen stand, it revolves when I'm reeling it in. It revolves much easier than one without, which is going to be flopping around everywhere. These bushings, they've just brought it down to the same diameter as that of a toilet roll, really, so it'll just work the same way. So I've got 2 of those. I can strip line off, I'll reverse it, and I'll clean line with these. Do it exactly the same way. We'll get into that shortly. So the first job we're gonna do, we've got this 275 metres, which equates to 300 yards. 300 yards of this 20 kilo Power Pro braid. I've got to measure off 150 yards, in other words half of the line for one reel, and once I've done that, what's left on the spool will be 150 yards to go on that one. So there's going to be an equal amount onto both of those. But how do you measure 150 metres, 150 yards of this line off? Well, the answer has come from the carp fishing world, and it is distance sticks. This isn't a video about distance sticks, so I'm not going to talk about them too much. There's lots of videos on distance sticks here on YouTube, so if you're not familiar with them, go and watch a few tutorials. These distance sticks are set to the usual 12 feet apart, or 4 yards. I've got to measure 150 yards of this new braid, and that works out at 37.5 wraps. There are 4 yards between the stick, so 37.5 times by 4 equals 150. All I've done here is tie a small loop on the end of the braid after I've threaded this 12-foot rod with it. That loop is slipped over the first stick to hold it in place, and then you can start wrapping the sticks. I'm holding the spool of braid between thumb and index finger of my left hand and just letting the line pay off as it's needed. This is something that you need to do on your own, really.
don't have the kids or your dog out in the garden with you. It's really easy to get distracted and lose count of all your wraps. So let's leave him doing the wraps and talk about the preferred ways to load brand new line off the spool. There are two options here. The first is to have it free running on a pencil and simply reel all of the new line off the spool while it's spinning. This is my preferred method. The other option is to have the spool in a fixed position and the line is taken off from the side of the spool with the label on. Here the spool is simply fixed to the ground with a tent peg. There are wet versions of both of these methods too. Here the spool's free spinning in a bucket of water, which is equivalent of it running on a pencil. The line is lubricated by the water, and some people say this helps lay the line smoothly onto the reel. And finally, this spool submerged in water and weighted down with a few leads, and the line is taken from the spool with the side of the label facing up. Whichever way you prefer, if your line is loaded onto the reel in a satisfactory manner and you don't suffer from line twist, then it's fair to say that that method is working for you and there's no point in you changing to another method. If you're an angler that suffers from line twist, perhaps it's time to think about changing to one of the other methods. I don't suffer from line twist and I never have. To be fair, I tend to use a lot of braid for my fishing, and braid doesn't behave in the same way as monofilament line. Stiff monofilament lines are affected more by line twist than supple ones. Thick line, by its nature, tends to be stiff because of its thickness. Fluorocarbon monofilaments are very stiff in any diameter and can be problematic, so do your research before loading up with fluorocarbon. It's acknowledged now that line twist is mainly caused by line coming off the spool via the clutch or line coming off the spool via the bait runner. Anyone here who's new to distance sticks needs to make sure that when you're wrapping the sticks, they're wrapped up with an open bail arm, not with the quick drag loosened off and not with the bait runner activated. Do it with a open bail arm. So if you just have a quick look on eBay or Amazon, just put in line loading devices and you'll see all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. They all promise to change your life and eliminate line twist. Do you use a device? Let me know down in the comments. I use this one. It simply replicates my pencil method and the suction cup holds well on the table. It makes it easy to do without having an extra pair of hands. It's cheap and it works well. So let's go back to the idiot and see how he's getting on with the wrapping up that new braid.
37 and a half. That's our 37 and a half wraps. Now I'm not going to cut the line here, I'm just going to mark it. Just going to mark it with a little bit of a Sharpie pen, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm going to get my spool of braid and wind it up by hand until that pen mark comes back to me. Perhaps I should have used a brighter colour. There we are. And that is the point of 37 and a half wraps, and that's where I'm going to snip it. I'll do it this way, so when it comes to loading it onto the reel, I can just put the reel straight onto that rod and tie this on, and that it saves me having to thread through the rod again. So that's 37 and a half wraps, and we're now committed. So I've got 37 and a half wraps on my distance sticks ready to go onto this reel. 37 and a half wraps equals 150 yards, yard being 4 feet. And obviously if this is a 300 yard spool, 150 yards is there on the distance sticks, and this is going to be 150 yards because it's half of 300 yards, so that's going to be for the second reel. So the first thing I've got to do is strip all of this old braid and backing line off this reel. You've seen me do this with the other reels. This is done in exactly the same way. Let's just pin the spool down with some blue tack so it's not dancing all over the floor. We'll get the big arbor and the rod tube section. This is built in exactly the same way. Like I said, we don't need a central support on these because these are very stiff anyway. But the two smaller discs are a sliding fit onto the rod tube just to keep it central. And the bigger discs on the end once the wing nut is nipped down. That is what's going to grip.
So we're going to get all of this new braid onto these two big bait runners. So the first thing to do is completely empty the spool, as you seen me do before. Blue tack the spool down on the table and completely empty it all. Next, going to put that now empty reel onto the rod that we was using for wrapping up, and then it's simply a matter of winding in the whole of that 37.5 wraps. Next up, back to that old line that we took off. We're going to use that as backing line, same as we did before. It goes on backwards, so keep reeling in until you get the level correct on the reel. That's what we're looking for, about 2 mil just below the lip of the reel there. And then it's time to reverse the line, so it goes onto one of the empty rod tubes, completely spun it all off the spool. Then it's time to change the other rod tube. Now put the empty one onto the arbor, and this is where the reversing happens, as you know. If you're not comfortable with holding the big bulk of the rod tube with all that line on, you can put it on the kitchen stand and do it that way, but I just hold it same as I did the toilet roll. It's just bigger, but it's just the same. Nice loose grip, and just let it spin as it wants to. So once it's reversed, put the end caps on the rod tube onto the kitchen stand, and the whole lot is completely wound all the way back onto that empty spool, and you'll find that it just comes up perfectly level, and that is it complete. And I'll repeat the process for the other reel, and there we have my 250 yard of brand new braid onto both of those reels, divided across equally.
Okay, there's our 150 yards of braid loaded onto both the reels. Now it's time to have a look at my big pick reels. Now these big pit reels take a lot of line, as if my arms have not had enough punishment making this video, reeling in backwards and forwards. So it's about 350 yards of 12-pound Gardner GT80 on these, and it's got a 50-pound armour cord braided leader as well. I'll show you how I'm going to deal with this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to reverse this line just so that you can see how I deal with the leader and how I also deal with cleaning the line. I do clean all of my mono line on my carp reels about every 4 or 5 sessions. Get a little bit of detergent and run it through. I find it does help to keep cleat line when you've cast in and you want the line to sink. It'll cut through the surface tension so much easier if it's clean line. So the first thing we've got to do, as ever, is strip this off onto our rod tube arbor. So it's got a leader first, but I'm just going to put that on as normal. We'll deal with that when we come to the reversing section. So this is going to be quite a lot of line on this. To say it's about 350 yards. So I've got the shock leader, he's going to go on first. We'll deal with that later. The knot's just gone through. I'm now on the line. So I'm going to run this through right the way through until I get to the knot that's joining my main line to the backing line. I can leave the backing line in place, just snip off that knot, reverse it, tie it back on, and then continue as normal. I don't need to worry about backing line because I'm only reversing the line. If I was starting from scratch, then I would approach this the same way as I have done all of the others. So here we go, let's strip this off. I'll see you in a second. So there we are, I've got all of my GT80 on there. Here's the knot where the backing line is. The backing line can stay in place. What I'll do, I'll just snip that off there. Just snip the knot off. We know that that is a measured portion of line and it's going to fit back on there with that backing line, no problem. So just put that to the side for a second, and it's time to change rod tubes because we're going to reverse. We still have that 50-pound armour cord shock leader buried within this that we've got to deal with. We'll come to that shortly. Again, it's just the same as reversing the line as we've seen time and time again in this video, but instead of toilet rolls, this time it is on a rod tube. So a little bit of tape. Hold that on there, to the top of the rod tube. Line coming off from the bottom between my fingers, and swap all of this onto there. But when I see the 50-pound armour cord shock leader start to appear in here, I'm going to really slow down. I want the armour cord to stay on there. I'll show you what I mean when we get there. Okay, here we go. Swap from one to the other. This is now reversing the line. Now I've just come to my shock leader. There's the knot. And I want the shock leader to stay on this rod tube, so I'm just going to snip the knot off there. And get a bit of tape just to stop it unravelling. And just put that aside for now. We'll come to that very shortly. So cleaning the line. You probably have noticed yourself after you've been fishing 4 or 5 sessions, your line gets more and more difficult to be able to sink. You normally need to help it, your rod tip underwater and what have you. But if you've got clean line, take that grease off, it will break the surface tension really easy. So what I'll do, if I'm just cleaning the line, I'll run maybe 200 yards off onto the rod tube arbor. Just run 200 yards off, put the caps on, put it on the stand. And then as I'm reeling in, I've got a warm water, washing up liquid solution and a damp rag. And I'll just hold it up against a rod eye. So there's all our Gardner GT80 back on the reel. It's been reversed and it's also been cleaned. This is going to fish lovely for the first few sessions. Just got to deal with the armour cord leader again. So just pop it on the stand there so it's not going to get tangled up. I'll just snip the old knot off. So that's job done. I've got 2 more of these reels to do. I'll reverse the other 2 as well and clean them. They're all going to be ready for next spring. So there you are, guys. That's how I work with line, bulk spools, big reels, little reels, reverse line, everything. I'll see you in the next video. We'll catch some fish. Cheers.